wanted to be princess. I didn't want to be a monster.
In 1973, a 14-year-old girl walked onto a movie screen and scared the entire world. People fainted in theaters, some walked out, some reportedly couldn't sleep for weeks. And the girl at the center of all of it, a kid from Connecticut who had never planned on being famous, had her whole life changed in a single night. This is the rise and fall of Linda Blair. The girl from Connecticut, Linda Denise Blair, was born on January 22, 1959, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her father, James, was a former Navy test pilot who later became an executive recruiter. Her mother, Eleanor, worked in real estate. When Linda was just 2 years old, the family relocated to Westport, Connecticut, a well-heeled suburb that sits about an hour from New York City, which is where she grew up and where, in many ways, her story really begins. She was 5 years old when she landed her first modeling job. By 6, she had her first contract, print ads in the New York Times, and was soon appearing in the catalogs of Macy's, Sears, and JCPenney. Around the same time, her parents enrolled her in equestrian lessons, and she took to riding horses with a seriousness that would stay with her for the rest of her life. It was the kind of early start that seemed perfectly ordinary at the time. The way child modeling in the 1960s was treated as a wholesome side activity for photogenic kids whose parents thought it might be fun. For Linda, it turned out to be the beginning of a career that would take her places nobody could have predicted, and through experiences nobody would have wished on her. In 1968, when she was 9 years old, she landed a regular role on the CBS daytime soap opera Hidden Faces. The show only ran until 1969, but it gave her screen experience at an age when most kids were still figuring out long division. Her first theatrical film appearance came in 1970 with The Way We Live Now, followed by a small part in the comedy The Sporting Club in 1971. She was 12 years old, living in Westport, going to school, continuing to ride horses competitively, and acting when the right jobs came along. She had a brother named Jimmy and a sister named Debbie, and by all accounts it was a fairly normal home life for a kid who also happened to be a working actress. Nothing in any of that suggested what was coming. And then, in 1972, a casting call went out for a film called The Exorcist. The Exorcist. William Friedkin was not an easy director to satisfy. He had won the Academy Award for Best Director the year before for The French Connection, and now he was adapting William Peter Blatty's best-selling novel about a young girl possessed by a demon. The role of Regan MacNeil required something almost impossible to define. A child who could be entirely innocent in one moment and genuinely terrifying in the next, without it looking like performance. Friedkin auditioned roughly 600 girls for the part. He had almost given up on finding someone age-appropriate and was beginning to consider casting older actresses of 15 or 16 when a 13-year-old Linda Blair showed up without an appointment. Friedkin later recalled that he wasn't only looking for an actress who could handle the material, he was looking for one who seemed mentally robust enough to survive what was going to happen when the film was released. Blair, at 13, struck him as exactly that person. He was right about her ability to handle the role. He was considerably less right about the rest of it. She got the role. Filming began in 1972, and it was not a pleasant experience for anyone involved, least of all a 13-year-old. The set was notoriously difficult and psychologically intense. Friedkin would sometimes fire a blank gun before takes to unsettle the cast and create an atmosphere of genuine unease. He physically struck a real priest on set before a take to elicit an authentic emotional response. The temperature in the bedroom set was deliberately kept near freezing for the possession scenes, with cast and crew working in conditions that were physically brutal for everyone. The shoot stretched over months, with long hours and constant reshoots. For Linda, there were also physical consequences that would stay with her. During one of the possession sequences, she was strapped to a mechanically rigged bed that was operated erratically and without sufficient care, and the harness fractured her lower spine. She was a child on a set run by adults who were making the film they wanted to make, and her welfare was not the priority. She was a child, and nobody stopped filming. The Exorcist opened in December 1973. The reaction was unlike anything Hollywood had seen in years. People genuinely panicked. Reports came in from theaters across the country of audience members fainting, vomiting, and fleeing. Warner Brothers, the studio distributing the film, had to place off-duty police officers in some theaters to manage the crowds. And at the center of all of it was 14-year-old Linda Blair. The film earned her a Golden Globe Award for Best Supporting Actress and an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress, one of the youngest actresses ever nominated in that category. Film critic Mark Clark later wrote that in her performance, she matched adult co-star Ellen Burstyn note for note. For a few weeks, it seemed like Linda Blair was going to be one of the great actresses of her generation. Then, the complications started.
I couldn't have that without The Exorcist and the platform that it gave me. My goal is to make the world a better place while I'm here.
The first was the controversy over her Oscar nomination. Word leaked that not all of the performance had been hers. The demonic voice had been dubbed by actress Mercedes McCambridge, who had recorded her vocal work in secret and without screen credit. When the nomination was announced, McCambridge went public, demanding recognition for her contribution. The story became a tabloid fixture, and the implication, however unfair, was that Blair had received credit for work that wasn't entirely hers. The Academy quietly did not award her the Oscar. It went to Tatum O'Neal for Paper Moon. Blair was 14 years old, and she was having to navigate a public controversy about the legitimacy of her own performance. The second complication was far more serious and far more frightening. Because the film had terrified so many people, and because a subset of those people genuinely struggled to separate fiction from reality, death threats began arriving at the Blair family home. Some of the people who sent them appeared to believe that Linda Blair was actually connected to demonic forces in some way. Warner Brothers responded by hiring off-duty police officers to live with the family around the clock for 6 months. When the studio's promotional obligations ended and they stopped paying for security, the threats didn't stop. The family eventually had to hide Linda with friends and relatives in Vermont, Connecticut, and New Jersey to keep her safe. She was 15 years old and living in hiding because she had been too good at her job. The typecast trap. After The Exorcist, Linda Blair should have had her choice of roles. What she got instead was a very specific kind of offer. Hollywood had decided she was the person you called when you needed a teenager in trouble, and it seemed content to keep calling her for exactly that and nothing else. In 1974, she appeared in Airport 1975, playing a kidney transplant patient on an imperiled airplane. That same year came Born Innocent, a made-for-television film in which she played a 14-year-old girl repeatedly failed by her family and eventually sentenced to a juvenile detention center. The film was the #1 television movie of 1974, and Blair's performance was genuinely powerful. But the film's most notorious sequence, a violent assault scene, drew a level of outrage that went far beyond critical displeasure. Several days after the broadcast, a young girl in San Francisco was assaulted in a way that mirrored the scene. NBC was sued. The controversy became a landmark moment in the debate over television violence, and the network removed the scene from all future airings. Blair was 15 years old, and she had just been pulled into one of the most serious public controversies television had seen in years. In 1975, she starred in Sarah T., Portrait of a Teenage Alcoholic, a television film about a teenager falling into alcohol dependency. Then Sweet Hostage, in which she was abducted. Then Victory at Entebbe. The pattern was impossible to miss, and critics began noting it openly, asking in print how it was possible that a teenage actress was building an entire career around being violated and victimized, and suggesting that Blair must be wondering who she had to know to get out of this cycle. She was 16 years old when she made Sweet Hostage. The man playing her captor and eventual love interest was Martin Sheen, who was 35 at the time. Around this same period, she began dating Rick Springfield, the Australian rock musician who was 25 years old when they met, and she was 15. The relationship was not hidden exactly. Springfield wrote about it in his memoir, Late at Night, and Blair has spoken about it in interviews over the years. Entertainment Weekly described Springfield's account of the relationship as unsettling. Her mother knew about it and did not intervene. The relationship lasted a couple of years, generating press coverage that framed it as a romantic story rather than the deeply inappropriate situation it was. It was one of several relationships Blair had during her teenage years with men who were significantly older, and it says something about the environment she was operating in that none of it attracted meaningful scrutiny at the time.
I had a lot of animals, and I wanted to be a veterinarian, and all of a sudden I was famous.
Exorcist, 2, and The Unraveling. By 1977, Linda Blair was 18 years old and had spent nearly half her life in the public eye. The year began with the production of Exorcist II: The Heretic, a sequel that, on paper, looked like a serious undertaking. John Boorman, an Academy Award-nominated director known for Deliverance, was behind the camera. Richard Burton, one of the most respected actors of his generation, was her co-star. The budget was substantial. The film became the most expensive Warner Brothers had ever produced at the time. What ended up on screen was a disaster. Blair had initially declined the project because she didn't like the original script. When a revised version was presented to her, she agreed to sign on, at which point she was contractually bound to the film. Then the script changed again during production, being rewritten multiple times, until it bore little resemblance to what she had agreed to make, and she had no way out. She later said it ended up being a total mess. Critics savaged it upon release, with reviews ranging from bewildered to openly contemptuous. Despite earning $30.7 million at the box office, it was widely considered a catastrophic artistic failure. Blair carried the failure of the film hard, and it was a project she came to deeply regret. For Linda, 1977 was also the year that everything in her personal life collapsed at once. Her parents' marriage ended in divorce during production. Her relationship with Rick Springfield ended. She was dealing with depression and had developed a serious drinking problem. She later described her dependency in stark terms, drinking whatever she could find, enough to guarantee she would pass out at night. It was a way of getting through the days, and it was working in the worst possible sense of that word. And then, on December 20th, 1977, she was arrested. The circumstances unfolded from a trip she had made to Florida earlier that autumn to attend the funerals of Lynyrd Skynyrd members Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines, and Cassie Gaines, who had died in a plane crash in October. In Florida, she met a cocaine dealer who was also selling pedigree puppies. She returned later to buy a puppy, was pressured into purchasing cocaine, and became ensnared in a DEA wiretap investigation targeting a large distribution ring. She was swept up in an operation that arrested more than 30 people. Drug Enforcement Administration officials claimed the ring had moved more than $3 million worth of cocaine across state lines. Blair pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of conspiracy to possess cocaine. She was sentenced to 3 years probation and fined $5,000. As part of the plea agreement, she was also required to make at least 12 public appearances speaking to young people about the dangers of drug use, a condition that had its own particular irony, given what her public life had looked like in the years leading up to the arrest. She was 18 years old. In the span of a single year, she had made a film that was nearly universally mocked, watched her parents' marriage end, battled alcoholism, lost friends in a plane crash, and been arrested on federal drug charges. In a 2001 Lifetime interview, she reflected on that period with the distance of someone who had barely survived it. She said it was one of the most difficult years anyone could have survived, and that she gave herself credit for making it through, because she knew it had nearly killed her.
So I was just so programmed for whether I liked it or not.
The long slide. The drug arrest effectively ended the first chapter of Linda Blair's career. Hollywood's major studios were not interested in taking chances on someone who had just pleaded guilty to a drug charge, and the leading roles in serious films dried up quickly. What followed was a period that her defenders call cult classic territory, and her detractors called rock bottom. After taking a year off from acting and quietly competing in national equestrian circuits under the pseudonym Martha McDonald, a way of returning to one of the things she genuinely loved, away from any spotlight, she returned to screens in 1978 with a Wes Craven-directed television film called Stranger in Our House, also released under the title Summer of Fear, based on a novel by Lois Duncan. That same year, she starred in Wild Horse Hank, a Canadian production where she played a college student fighting to save wild mustangs from ranchers. It was the kind of role she was comfortable in. She had the equestrian skills to back it up, and it pointed to a version of a career that might have developed differently under different circumstances. In 1979, she starred in Roller Boogie, a musical set in the world of competitive roller skating that was very much a product of its cultural moment. It found an audience and established her as a sex symbol for a new generation of fans, but it was not the kind of film that changes anyone's professional trajectory. The 1980s brought a run of exploitation and grindhouse pictures. Hell Night in 1981, Chained Heat in 1983, Savage Streets in 1984, Red Heat in 1985. In 1983, she also posed nude in Playboy. The Razzie Awards, which existed to mock the worst of Hollywood's output, gave her 5 nominations and 2 wins during this period. She later earned a somewhat affectionate reputation as a cult figure in the world of low-budget horror and exploitation cinema, and Savage Streets in particular developed a genuine following over the years. A TV Guide review of that film called her performance her best since The Exorcist, and then added, pointedly, that was not saying much. She had also, by this point, begun a relationship with Rick James, the funk and R&B musician. The two dated for roughly 2 years in the early 1980s. James later wrote about her in his memoir, Glow, describing their time together in candid terms. He also confirmed that he wrote his 1983 hit Cold-Blooded about her, something Blair herself acknowledged publicly over the years. Throughout this period, she auditioned for roles that might have recalibrated everything. She tested for the female lead in Taxi Driver in 1976. The role went to Jodie Foster, who received an Academy Award nomination for it. She auditioned for The Blue Lagoon in 1980. The role went to Brooke Shields. Each near miss was a window into what might have been, and each one quietly confirmed that the door to the mainstream was not entirely closed, just very difficult to open from where she was standing.
Good will always win over evil, but it is a process.
What remained? By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Blair had largely stepped back from the film world, appearing in television movies and guest spots. One notable exception came in 1996 when Wes Craven, the same director she had worked with on Stranger in Our House back in 1978, cast her in a cameo in Scream. She played an obnoxious news reporter outside Woodsboro High School, a brief but memorable moment of self-aware fun that audiences who recognized her appreciated enormously. In 1997, she did something that surprised almost everyone. She stepped onto a Broadway stage, cast as Betty Rizzo in a major revival of Grease. It was a genuine stretch from everything she had been known for, and she handled it well enough to complete the run. She starred in the Fox Family reality series Scariest Places on Earth beginning in 2000, hosting for 6 seasons as the show visited supposedly haunted locations around the world. The show ran until 2006 and brought her back to a mainstream television audience, many of whom had grown up with The Exorcist as a formative piece of their childhood. In 2006, she guest starred in an episode of Supernatural on the CW, playing a detective who helps the Winchester brothers, a role the show's writers created specifically for her, deliberately steering away from anything related to the supernatural or demonic, knowing she was apprehensive about leaning into that legacy again. In 2022, she appeared on Season 8 of The Masked Singer, competing as the Scarecrow, a light-hearted turn that introduced her to an entirely new generation of viewers who may not have been alive when The Exorcist was released. In 2023, she made a cameo appearance in The Exorcist, Believer, the legacy sequel that reunited her with Ellen Burstyn on screen for the first time since 1973. It was a small moment, but a meaningful one. 50 years after the original film had changed both of their lives, Blair also served as a production advisor during filming, helping the film's younger actresses understand how to manage the psychological demands of the material. Director David Gordon Green told Fandango that she had been genuinely helpful in navigating the emotional challenges for the new cast. But what has genuinely defined the second half of Linda Blair's life is not film at all. It is animals. She founded the Linda Blair World Heart Foundation in 2004, a nonprofit organization dedicated to rescuing and rehabilitating abused, neglected, and abandoned animals from the streets of Los Angeles and from overwhelmed city and county shelters. She runs the foundation from a 2-acre rescue sanctuary in California, where she lives and works full-time. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, she personally traveled to Mississippi and rescued 51 displaced dogs that had been left behind when their owners evacuated. The foundation has saved over 1,000 animals since its founding. She has received recognition from organizations including PETA for her sustained commitment to animal welfare, and she has spent, by her own account, her life's savings on the cause. In January 2025, she announced that she was working on a memoir and expressed her intentions to restart her acting career. The full picture. Looking at Linda Blair's life from a distance, what stands out is not the sensational parts, though the sensational parts are certainly there. What stands out is how young she was for all of it. She was 13 when she got the role that defined her, 14 when the film came out, 15 when she needed bodyguards, 15 when she began a relationship with a 25-year-old man, 16 when she was making films with adult co-stars in inappropriate situations, 18 when her year fell apart in every possible direction at once. The entertainment industry of the 1970s had very few guardrails for any of that, and the people around her, studios, managers, producers, were primarily interested in what she could do for them, not in what was happening to her. She made films that put her in compromising situations as a minor. She was surrounded by adults who were not acting like adults. And when things went wrong, it was her name in the headlines and her career that paid the price, not theirs. What she built on the other side of all of it, the foundation, the sanctuary, the decades of work on behalf of animals who had no one else speaking for them, is something she chose entirely for herself, on her own terms. Nobody cast her in that role. Nobody offered her a contract or told her it would be good for her image. She simply decided that it was the thing worth doing, and went and did it. The Today Show ran a segment about her foundation titled From Devil to Angel, and while that framing is a little on the nose, the sentiment behind it was not wrong. The rise was spectacular and fast. The fall was public and painful. And what came after is, in many ways, the most honest part of the whole story. Most people remember Linda Blair for one role, from one film, from 1 year of her life, but she was so much more than that. And the years after the fame are, in many ways, the most interesting part of the story. A kid who was handed something enormous before she understood what it was, surrounded by people who weren't looking out for her, and who eventually found her way to a life she chose entirely on her own terms. That's worth remembering too. If this video brought back some memories, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep telling stories like this one, and there are plenty more where this came from.